Hello to everybody.
Thank you.
We're here for the How to Fix Bias in Machine Translation panel. I'm your moderator, so my name is Simon Caton, and I'm joined by Dr. Danielle Saunders, Janiça Hackenbuchner, and Marvin Mouroum. Danielle is our resident expert. Janiça and Marvin are two of the representatives of the winning team from the recent Artificially Correct Hackathon run by the Goethe-Institut. I had the pleasure of being one of the judges for that. So we have quite a wide range of various participants from that hackathon here to discuss how we can go about fixing bias in machine translation. Before we really get into this, a little bit of an overview of how the session is going to work. I'm going to give you a very, very quick overview now. Danielle is going to give us a brief overview of some of the major challenges in this area. Marvin and Janiça will show us the winning entries from the two teams with a bit of a sort of an explanation, the challenge that they were addressing, and hopefully a slight sort of demo or example of how it works. And then we've set aside quite a bit of time for Q&A. I very, very strongly encourage, if you have questions, please put them into the chat or relay them to me in some way, and I will put them to one of our panelists. Then we have quite a bit of time set aside for that. Before we really get going, a couple of things that are a little bit difficult is a lot of people know bias when they see it. The problem is if you ask somebody to write down what does bias mean, they can get a bit stuck. So usually the easiest way to explain this is with an example or two. In this particular example, there are actually two biases. The first one should hopefully be obvious to any of you who have a little bit of German proficiency. The first one is the feminine nature of housekeeper in the first row. The second one is a language proficiency issue. So I'm a British native speaker. I've made a language mistake in the second one, and Google has automatically defaulted to the male type. So in these two situations, we've got a clear bias towards the female housekeeper. And then once the language proficiency error creeps in, albeit a small one, Google defaults and flips to a different gender. And so usually when we talk about bias, we mean things like some negative impact on one or more social constructs. And these can be gender, race, social status, beliefs, language proficiency, and a large number of other things. This is not localized only to German. We can do the same thing in other languages. And a lot of the reasoning for this bias is it comes from relatively clear and understandable places. The first one is ambiguity. So the doctor or the housekeeper, the bank manager or whatever, they're not obviously gendered. However, stereotypically, if we go back far enough in terms of society or whether bits and pieces of literature or the internet as a whole, we tend to see that there are these sort of stereotypes, and a doctor tends to be male, bank manager also tends to be male, and nurse tends to be referred to as female. And the problem is that a lot of these models and translation techniques are used by training on open and available data, such as literature, the internet, and in general, human-generated content. And the problem in a space like this is creating new data is far more expensive than training new models. And in the machine learning space, that's a very, very big problem. So what really can we do about this, or what are the problems for things like this? Well, the first one has an impact on a very wide range of domains, from how you interact with a customer service agent to the reputation of your own company. Things like marginalization and discrimination get a lot worse. And there are a whole load of other sort of funny meme-like things that we see on the internet of just bad translations as well. Okay. The problem is that we need more and more people to work in this area, right? And because debiasing these things is very, very difficult. To do this, the Goethe-Institut ran a hackathon, which is why we are here, trying to recognize some key challenges, develop some new solutions, which both Marvin and Janiça are going to show to us, and in general, try to increase participation. The kinds of things that we saw some projects trying to deal with data curation, to have new data sets, inclusion of modern day language constructs such as neo-pronouns, how to intervene and fix bias, as well as its measurement and detection. And we'll see two of these coming up in a few moments' time. Well, bringing this all together, about 70 participants from 4 continents were involved in the hackathon, bringing together developers, translators, researchers, domain experts, And we saw even, high school students, so 16, 17-year-olds, all the way up to postdoctoral researchers and professional developers. And one of the things that for me as a member of the jury, which was very nice to see, was structured teams that came together specifically for the hackathon, as well as completely serendipitous, never met before collaborations spawning and starting up, okay? I'm going to stop there with a very brief introduction, and I'm going to hand over to Danielle to give a much more in-depth overview of some of the challenges in this space. So Danielle, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Simon. And I will share my screen. So as Simon mentioned, I was involved in the hackathon as someone advising the teams. I've worked on bias in machine translation in the past. And I was also a proposer of one of the challenges. In fact, the challenge that Marvin's team had one of the winning entries for. So I'll just discuss briefly the two challenges that the two winning entries addressed and the reasons why they were proposed and the reasons, at least I think, they were important. So first of all, the challenge addressed by Janiça's team with the solution bias by us was the challenge creating resources against societal biases in AI. This was proposed by the IFM in Germany and the Finnish Center for Artificial Intelligence. And the idea was really around, as Simon said, we need people to be aware of these problems. We need them to care. So it was about creating either a data set or a platform for people to share examples of bias in AI, for people to discuss examples of bias in AI, and maybe either raise awareness for the general public who might not be aware of the kind of mistakes these systems can make, or maybe a goal of informing people who actually work on these systems. So there's one element of raising awareness in general. It's important for everyone to know what these systems are capable of or not capable of as they become more and more widespread. And there's another element of actually encouraging the people who develop these systems, who research these systems, to really work on these problems, to know that the shortcomings are being seen. And the solution by the Bias by Us team will be presented in just a moment. The other challenge from Marvin's Word2Vec solution team was proposed by me based on work I did at the University of Cambridge and currently at RWS. And this challenge revolved more around specifically identifying data and identifying sentences that are susceptible to bias in translation. So you can imagine that there are some sentences which are about people, and if you translate them, like the examples Simon showed, you might end up with problems that reflect stereotypes, that reflect social biases. And then there are, an infinite number of other sentences which are about music, the weather, the concept of time, apparently, that really have very little risk of propagating social biases when you translate them. You might still want the translations to be correct, but you probably don't care as much as if you are translating a sentence about a real human being with an identity. And another element of this challenge was that a lot of research into this problem has been done in English, purely because there is a lot of widely used data sets in English. But I was really interested to see if these teams could expand this work beyond English to multiple other languages. And the goal would have been, on the one hand, to flag out translations that might cause problems, but on the other hand, to maybe inspire new research. As I said, a lot of this research is into English because that's where the data is. if we have a way to get more data, maybe that would widen the research into the problems. And again, we'll hear about the solution that addressed this challenge a bit more in a moment. So those were the relevant challenges for today's panel. And I think I'll pass back to Simon now.
That's great. Thanks, Danielle. Maybe just to help our audience just a little bit. Why would you suspect, or what was your sort of your core motivation for entering into this area of work? Like what's the sort of what would somebody be sort of doing or achieving for themselves if they came into this kind of area?
Sure. So I should say this is a very active area of research. I think it really started growing a lot in the last 2 or 3 years. But it's been active for a while, and now it's very, very active. And I think it's a fascinating area because the question that it's really asking is how much we really understand what AI is doing and how much we can really control what AI is doing. You know, you said it at the beginning when you said that, you know, these are problems that are coming from the data. It's easier to retrain models than to fix the data. But the underlying question is, can we fix the data? Do we really know how the data affects the model? You know, how much control over these systems do we really have? And as AI systems become more and more prevalent, I think those are very important questions. Not just people interested in gender bias, racial bias, second language speaker bias, for anyone who is interested in the impact of AI.
Okay, that segues actually into another really nice question. For our businesses, our scientific community, our innovators, what would you think they need to be prioritizing? Like, what are they not doing that could help either bring more people into this area or in general try and help the wider community solve some of these problems?
So I think a year ago I would have said that the problem was resources. I think in fact now the resources are being put together all the time. I can think of 2 or 3 big examples just from this year, both from industrial groups and industrial research groups and academic groups. But I think, so I think now maybe the big challenge is what really happens with real human language. You know, a lot of these resources are great for identifying kind of edge case problems, but it's unclear whether they really reflect how people use these systems. So that's, I think, a priority. Another priority is that these groups actually need to use these resources that they're developing. You know, they've got these test sets that can flag up that a problem is happening. Now they actually need to maybe fix the problems.
I think that yep. I think actually I would probably agree with a lot of that. You know, so many people release the solution and never really think about it in its wider context, right? So finally, and maybe this doesn't necessarily have to be a long answer, but in your sort of view, if we had a perfect system, what might some properties of that be? If not, what would it look like in its entirety?
So I think a perfect machine translation system would be telepathy, but a very good translation system, a very good machine translation system. Clearly it would need to be fluent in the target language, but I think more importantly, it would be faithful to whatever is input. So it doesn't matter if you've produced this very fluent sentence from Google Translate or whatever, if it is not what the user wanted to translate. And I think that's really important if, you know, for those of us who are not fluent in second languages, you know, if you see a very fluent looking output, you might just accept that. You might not think to question whether it is actually correctly interpreting what you want to say. And I think a perfect, if we're getting past that, a perfect system would also give the user some autonomy. Let you choose whether you want to use certain words or avoid certain words. Let you choose whether you want a particular style of language, formal or informal. And I think the only way we can know if we've got there is to really, like I said in my previous answer, translate lots of different kinds of real human language in the wild, if you like, and see how good the translations are.
Well, that's certainly a big challenge to set. Danielle, thank you. We will.
You asked for a perfect system.
I did. Yes, I know. We will come back to you in a few moments' time. For the moment, Janiça, would you be so kind as to present one of the first winning solutions from the hackathon?
Thank you, Simon. Yes, I'll just share my screen. Perfect. So, hi everyone. My name is Janiça Hackenbuchner, and as Simon said, I was part of the hackathon, and my team was one of the 2 winning teams. So we won the 3rd challenge, which Danielle already introduced, and our team project name was Bias by Us. And what we did or tried to achieve is to create a platform to gather, describe, and discuss cases of gender bias. So we focused on specifically gender bias. And I'll just give a quick overview of the team, because it wasn't just me, I'm just representing all of us. We were 5 people in total. We all met at the hackathon as well. And it's just interesting to have a look at the team to see that we all have different backgrounds, which was really helpful in the end, because everyone had different expertise. So we had Shrishti, who's a master's student majoring in census system technology. Then we have Bhargavi, who's a machine learning research associate at the Fraunhofer Institute. We had Joke, they are a postdoctoral researcher at Ghent University as part of the language and translation technology team. And then also Bettina Koch, who works in technical documentation and UI localization, and also specifically as an English to German translator. And of course, then there was me, a master's student in specialized translation. And I'm currently also writing my thesis on the topic of gender bias in neuro-machine translation, which is why I was really interested in participating in this hackathon in the first place. And we've already talked about this now. Danielle has talked about it, Simon has talked about it, but I also wanted to say sort of why it was important that our challenge was created, sort of why our challengers thought this challenge was important, and why we also decided to be a part of this challenge and to try to find a solution. Because as was mentioned, you can see here, there's also a case of gender bias in a machine translation output. And the issue of gender bias in such outputs is well known to people that work as translators or other experts working in this field. And as Danielle just said, what is really important is that the wider public might be aware of it, but might not necessarily spot small cases of bias if they understand the language in general, but they might not be proficient enough to really spot these differences. And even as translators, we need to really post-edit machine translated outputs to get rid of such gender bias. And research in this field is growing, but it has to continue to grow. And for that, as AI experts here at this hackathon, also, you must know, we need those good data sets. And with such good data sets, I mean that we need unbiased data sets. Because clearly these machine translation systems feed on the data we give them. And as already was mentioned from the past, it's just that these are biased. It's not like it's a purpose that these are biased data sets. It's just that doctors used to commonly be male and stewardesses used to be commonly female. So that is the problem that we are facing nowadays. And research in this field must be furthered and awareness about the issue must be raised. So our challenge was, as Danielle had already introduced, was to define and analyze gender bias for machine translation systems and or create a data set or a platform to discuss this case or to gather data. So what we did is we tried to combine those 2 aspects, and we created an online website as a platform under the name of Bias by Us to raise public awareness, so to inform the public and experts as well about the issues of gender bias in machine translation system. And this platform simultaneously serves to gather data for the creation of bias and bias-corrected data sets. So that is our goal. And with that, we want to help create a more gender-fair society. And this is just a quick screenshot of our website that works. And so this is the platform that we created with information on biases in language, on biases in machine translation, and what impact this has. And also we created different bias categories. And on this platform, cases of bias in machine translation outputs can be shared. So where users can collaboratively gather, describe, and discuss such cases of bias. And they can provide examples of bias translation outputs and corrected outputs, either by submitting them directly on the website or by linking bias outputs to our website from online machine translation systems. So from DeepL or from Google Translate, for example. And then these collected inputs can be moderated and reviewed by experts to make sure that it all makes sense, what is being added to our site. And through such collaborative and community-driven action, we aim to create large data sets for numerous different language combinations, something that we talked about that is really necessary in this field. That would be our aim, to create such large data sets. And then these data sets can be used for further research in this field. So the next steps are to continue adding more information on the issue of bias in machine translation, and obviously update this as this field of research continues to be elaborated. Then we also wish to create a browser plugin, as I mentioned, that you can go directly onto DeepL or Google Translate, and you can see, oh, there's a bias in this translation, mainly, first of all, focusing on gender bias, and then adding that from that website directly to our website, and then it gets saved as data to help us create those data sets. So that is sort of the main big thing that we wish to work on. And since the hackathon has passed, we have made a clear outline what we want to do as a team. We have had numerous team meetings and have met with the Goethe-Institut to talk about just in general how we want to organize our time, considering we're all either full-time employees or full-time students. We're doing this voluntarily on the side, but we were so excited about winning this hackathon and about what we started to create that we wish to sort of continue working on this project. And also, if this works, this could be something really good. So we really sort of have faith in our project and we all want to continue working on it. So we also have an outline of what we wish to spend the money on that we have been made available. For example, to buy a website domain name, to get technical expertise to work on this plugin, and also to store data sets, because if we start creating these huge data sets, hopefully with millions of entries, then we need to store that somewhere in the cloud. And then also we want to work on the initial creation of such a data set, on how to monitor the input to make sure that only adequate information gets added, and just in general also to talk about potential collaborations, either with experts, institutions, universities, so that we outline the plan, how we want to proceed as a team. So thank you very much for this, listening to this quick overview of our team and what we created or planned.
Thanks very much, Janiça. I have two questions for you. One actually that's just come in from a member of the audience, which I'll ask in a second. But maybe to precursor that, I mean, you talked a lot about the motivation for picking this topic and the associated challenges and the diversity of the team. Yet one of the things for me is standing out a little bit, and that's how could members of the audience, or how could the wider community help the Bias website grow? How could they support it? Are there things in which they could do to help you as a team? What would you need to make this sort of grow even more beyond the support you have already?
Yes, I mean, in this case, this is very straightforward, because the more people help us, the more people participate, the more information we can gather and the more data we can gather. And as we've mentioned now, we said how important these data sets are. And also me doing my thesis on this topic, I'm realizing how difficult it is to find appropriate data to train such engines. So it is hugely important to get data sets in all different kinds of languages. So the more people participate by adding cases of bias that they flag to us, the bigger these data sets can become, and the more languages we can have as data sets as well. So we really want this to be sort of a collaborative effort as well, that translators or experts from the field, but also non-translators or people that usually don't work in this area and see, oh, this is a mistake, this is not how it's supposed to be, that everyone can add to a data set. And then, yeah, the more the merrier. So everyone in the wider community can really participate and help us grow.
Along that line, there's a question that's just come in on the chat, which is actually very interesting. And I don't think we thought of this one even during the hackathon, but there's the question of what about bias in pictures? Would there be any way for the team to consider how to handle picture bias or bias within pictures?
That is really interesting. And I think in general, that is also probably a huge issue that can occur frequently. I think for us in the first case, we're focusing on text-related bias, also primarily focusing on gender-related bias, and even within gender-related bias, differentiate between binary and non-binary. So there's a lot going on already within that realm. And I think once we have sort of finalized that aspect, once everything in that aspect is working, then I think we can extend it to racial bias or other bias within text, and then think about expanding it to bias in pictures, because I think that is also something really interesting and topic and issue that has to be sort of looked at, but not something that we have specifically focused on yet and that we have our expertise in. So I think we would grow with what we have and then continue to work on other possibilities.
That sounds great. Janiça, I'm going to leave you there just for the moment, and we'll come back to you when we have the more general Q&A session towards the end. And I would remind the audience, please, do put questions into the chat so that I can ask questions. Otherwise, it's going to be me talking the whole time. For now, Marvin, can we hand over to you for the Word2Vec solution?
Yes, coming. Okay. So let's start here. All right. Yes, so we were the other team. Specifically, we worked on the solution that Danielle just, or on the challenge that Danielle just explained. To give you a quick summary also about our team, we were 4 people in the team. The 2 people on the left side, we knew each other before, and Estelle, she joined the team newly, so we didn't have any relationship before that. But we were all over the world, spread over. So Aisha was in Paris, Laurie was in southern France, in Marseille, and me and Estelle, we were in Berlin. So we did that in a nice remote fashion. And I have to say, I am a computer vision engineer, so I work mostly with machine learning, with images. Laurie does his PhD in machine learning and the likes, and Aisha is a designer, and Estelle, she I think started her studies in the topic. So we weren't really that much into the machine translation field. We did some stuff before because we were very interested in it, and that was also our motivation to join this hackathon, just to deal more with this topic or this particular field of machine learning. And since we were all aware of the problem that I think Simon and also Janiça just explained really well right now, and also Danielle, I don't have to repeat much. This problem is a huge problem, also not just for machine translation, I think in general for many machine learning fields. But here I think it's very visible because these machine translation tools, they work pretty well, and I would say they work really good enough. But there are these slight nuances, these connotations that kind of give it this bad taste, that if you have a bias in there and you wouldn't check for it and you sent it off as an email or you published it as some professional ad or anything, this wouldn't look good on you. So they have to be double checked. And yeah, we were thinking, okay, how can we solve this, or how can we flag these particular instances of text that are susceptible for bias in these texts, and therefore create a tool that researchers can use in order to improve these machine learning models, but also just a tool in general that people can use. And there we didn't just want to focus on gender. We wanted to focus also on racial bias, which we think is very important. And more importantly, we didn't just want to look at, let's say, one language, English, but we wanted to have something that's, you know, a holistic approach that can be used on all different languages. So whatever language you have, this tool can be used for it. So yeah, we came up with this solution in mind, and we wanted to address the solution for people who are just maybe grad students or writing the thesis, for researchers, for people professional in a professional field, for freelancers. So it should be usable by anyone that really has a problem or uses machine translation or works with it and has a problem in that field. And what we used to, or what tool we used to implement this solution is a word-to-vec model, machine learning model. What it does is to give you an overview. It takes a large corpus of text. In our case, we used the Google World Corpus, which has about 100 billion words in it. And it's trained on this corpus. And then it's able to give you the distance between words. So the relationship between words, how close one word is to another, for example. And with this model, we can basically find out that certain words are closer to other words. And if we have, for example, for gender bias, if we would have man and woman on one side, and we compare different words with it, we can find that certain words tend to lean towards one or the other. And this way we can see, okay, there's a disbalance here. There might be a bias. And by looking into this further during the hackathon and just trying to find words that we think are susceptible to bias and that we put into Google Translator, and that we checked out, we found that there is something here that can be exploited. So to give you an example here, the two words, nurse and boss, we plugged them into this, I don't know, this graph over here, and we saw that nurse just corresponds more to woman, that boss corresponds more to man. The word-to-vec solution for this shows that boss appears more open or more often with men, and nurse appears more often with women. And the word-to-vec is a machine learning model, and it can shows you the bias. But if you take the same input, the same data that we use for training this model and train a machine learning model with it, or machine translation model with it, then it will have this bias also intrinsically inside. So this is a way to check potential data sets or even texts and see where potential bias could be in by looking at the disbalance. And we wanted to have it as a nice solution that everyone can use. So at the end, we wanted to create a web interface that looks like that and that we created. And I want to give you a short demo here of how this works. I just need to change my screen here. So here we have this, this website that we created, and just a simple website that you can go on. It gives you some explanation of what we want to do, whom it is, and how it works. And this is our first, let's say, solution that we want to make public. And you can just type in things. So Simon, I remember you gave a sentence earlier, the housekeeper is happy. So if I gave that, if I put that in here, and I clicked on get results, then I would see that this would flag the housekeeper indeed. So as you could see on Google Translator, we also saw a bias here. And if you look at our score, we see that the score for female bias is way higher than the other scores. So here we can flag housekeeper as a potential location where machine bias is occurring. And as you could see in your example, there was actually a bias. But We also have other examples that we could use. For example, we can also use the nurse that we had earlier. Example, and we will see the same thing here. If you want to only look at words, for example, let's just take the word or the term boss that we had earlier, give that in, and then we can see that boss has a larger male bias. And that way, we can flag and show people how biased or how likely it is that a word or a sentence is prone to bias in machine translation. And the categories we see here, the female bias, the male bias, the racial bias, these are very much configurable. So we can, these are pre-configured by us. We are currently working on making that more robust and better. But everyone can set it up in a way that it gets better and makes more sense. Obviously, in the weekend that we had during the hackathon, this was a first approach. There has to be done a lot, but this can be done for any language and for any category. And then it's just a matter of how to configure it so to get the best out of it. And with this way, we are planning to create a first tool that researchers can use in order to create data sets for unbiased machine translation models. Yeah, this is the way we want to go further as a team, also together with the Goethe-Institut. Yeah, I think this is our goal, and yeah, this is how we started.
That's great, thanks, Marvin. Maybe an opening question from me to help our audience think of potential things they may like to ask about this topic to our panel. So were there very, very specific social problems or dilemmas that really encouraged you and your teammates to try to pick this challenge? I mean, was there, I mean, what was the sort of motivator at the end and the really sort of core incentive for you to do this? I mean, of all the ones you could have chosen, why was this the most important one for you as a team to work on?
Well, we work a lot with machine learning, and we see the bias. For example, for me, I work with computer vision models and data sets, and I see that if you have a bad data set, then the result is also bad. And if I, for example, look at data sets and the people are misrepresented, and then, for example, you look at people, you look at the percentage of Black people in a data set, and it's only people who play in the NBA, and that's it, then you can see there's a disbalance very much. And so for me, this topic was also always visible, and it's always there. And then, of course, you see it also in when you translate your text. I mean, I've done it a lot, and it is nice, however, work. I am happy with these tools, but there's always this bad taste to it that, yeah, you have to check it, and you have to be a bit scared that you don't oversee some of the issues in there, because then it's on you. And therefore, this was a very interesting challenge, very aware of the problem. And therefore, we really wanted to work on it, also because it's so, yeah, it's been really an issue that we as a team feel almost every day. Yeah.
I hear you there completely. So maybe a similar question, you know, because we've just had a really nice one come into chat, and I'm thinking who's best to answer this one. Maybe what would you say? I mean, how should the wider community help support this project? I mean, what could people do to help you and your teammates really push this a lot further? What would you need?
Yes, that's a very good point. I think we would need, first of all, visibility. So people talking about that, people using that, these tools that we will create here would obviously be amazing. I think also a lot of collaboration potential. I mean, the platform that Janiça was presenting, I mean, we could have very good collaboration here, you know, that one goes into the other. At the beginning, we would really like to start with creating tools for researchers themselves. And I think if in that community, this tool would get some knowledge and would start to be used, I think this would be the best benefit to push it further, and also then into other aspects of society where people can maybe use it for their personal usage.
Yep, no, I'd say so. So I mean, from a collaboration perspective, there's a lot of scope here as well, because whilst, you know, Word2Vec and the embedding space, you know, there's a lot of models that could fall into this kind of category as well. I mean, you know, Word2Vec is just one solution. You have the likes of Glove, you have all of these other embedding models as well that arguably could have similar problems. Would you anticipate being able to easily extend to some of those?
Yes, we have to focus our, let's say, our resources we have as a small team, obviously, to one thing, to make it better. But at some point, it would also make sense to check if other models maybe gave different or better results. But obviously, I think the idea behind it for these models, yeah, can be reused with other logics. So.
No, that sounds yep. No, that sounds good. We've had two very interesting questions just arrive into the chat. Danielle, if you're willing, I might put the first one to you and then open the second question to the panel as a whole. So Danielle, the question that's just come into the chat is, do you always need to define polar opposites to measure bias, or to measure bias in this manner? And I mean, whilst I appreciate this is directed most likely at Marvin's presentation, I think it's actually interesting to write in a wider context as well.
So I guess there's a couple halves to this. One is that traditionally, this is what has been done, because I think binary is easy to think about. Clearly, practically, no aspect of identity is binary. In fact, I think you could say no aspect of identity is binary. And, you know, I don't think it makes sense to think about bias as a binary issue. The other half of that question, though, of my answer, though, is that I think there is one case where you can think of bias as a binary issue, which is an affected group versus a group that is not affected. You know, if there is one group that is experiencing negative stereotypes or is misrepresented by a certain output, that is one group that you can separate from other groups that do not experience that. So in that sense, I guess, yes, it kind of might make sense to think about those two separate groups. I guess in terms of the phrasing of defining polar opposites, once again, I think it's a tool to make things easier to think about, and it doesn't necessarily, it's not necessarily a good way to continue thinking about bias. Yeah, I realize that's a kind of hedgy answer. I think it's what gets done. I think there's room in research for more nuanced views.
Janiça, would you have anything you would want to add to that from the perspective of the Bias by Us team?
Yes, I think it's pretty much how Danielle said it, that it's probably because it's easiest, and the same with gender. That is why so much research has been put into the direction of gender bias, because it is just clearly and easy to see, okay, that is supposed to be female, but it's given me a male. So I think that is sort of in terms of the gender bias, which is also why we thought, okay, it's easiest to start off with that. And that even means also non-binary gender. And then obviously, you know, there's the non-binary. And I think, for example, in terms of gender, that is also because it's just easier to find than maybe certain racial biases or even other biases that are not as obvious to detect. And I think with polar opposites regarding sort of the closeness of words, it's also just because it's easier, because man will be more opposite from female, like from woman, than, for example, man and boy. But then clearly there will also be differences in text between what words are associated with man or with boy. For example, we'd hope that more words like prison is closer related to man than to boy, but there's also going to be differences regarding that, but that might be slimmer, and for that reason sort of not as easy to detect. So I think the polar opposites is just sort of to get this research going, since it's still a really growing field, and because it's going to be easier to work with that. But the hope is that, you know, the better we get with all of this, the more we research in this area, the more aspects we can cover. And that sort of the binary gender studies and the really polar opposite studies are just sort of the beginning of a lot more.
Could I jump in back on the end of that answer quickly? I think what you said is absolutely right, but I think the risk as researchers is that there's always this tendency to reproduce what has come before. Or, you know, you cite a paper that has come before and you say, we are following the approach of these people from 3 years ago. And I've done it, and other people have done it, I'm sure. And then you don't end up developing from that limited, non-nuanced view. And I think in work on bias in AI, that has been changing. But that is the risk of that taking the easy starting point. But I agree, you need to start somewhere.
Maybe just to add one additional point, the binary nature of a measure in the sense of how biased or unbiased something is, by taking a polar opposite, it becomes much easier to mathematically quantify bias. So that's another sort of partial answer to the question. Marvin, could I bring you back in to handle the second part of this question, which was the additional examples of racial bias? So the question as articulated is, can you give another example where racial bias would be detected? And, you know, boss perhaps could be more imagined as a white male, or, you know, white could be more obviously related to sort of wealth and rich, or maybe you could comment on that a little bit.
Yes, I would like to take both questions, because I think I can answer maybe in one answer together, because I think they're kind of related. So when we talk about this, the solution that I presented, obviously for visualization reasons, I had this, you know, two-way street or one-way street where I have two ends, and this looks like polar opposite, but polar like these poles. But but like I said, it's configurable, and you can put as many categories in there as you want, and therefore it's not really polar in the sense where you can define your own categories and what words basically define that category, and then these words will react to the text and therefore give you a score for whatever you want to configure. So it's not really that polar in a sense. So the way how we detect gender bias is basically the same way we detect race bias. It's just different. The category is differently defined, and this can be fine-tuned by everyone who wants to put in the time and see which works best. And I have to say that when we look at the results, sometimes they're a bit surprising. So sometimes you would expect something to have a certain connotation because that's how you imagine bias, but sometimes that's not even the case. But here in this example, with the boss, actually, if I went back, you could see that, yeah, there was a high correlation with, I think, with male bias, but also we had, and that's really strange, a negative value for the racial bias. And we didn't really define the categories to really work like that. But here we can already see that because we, in the race bias, we put in minority groups, different terms for minority groups. And there now we have a negative bias. So maybe that's an indicator that this is really far away from those groups. It's really far away from this category that we defined. And that could be, again, be an indicator for a bias towards another category that could be the white one. We have to look into that. But there's a lot of fine-tuning that you can do with this tool. And I think that's what we are working on right now. We're working on taking these different poles, and we're subtracting one from the other. We're subtracting boss from man, and then we see what's happening, and we see how we can play them out together and get to a position where we can more accurately define these bias terms. Yeah, that's maybe what I want to say to them.
That's great, thanks. Okay, so of course, everybody's welcome to add more questions. There's one that I've been wanting to ask for a while, and Janiça, this one is coming to you. As somebody who entered into the hackathon as an individual, not necessarily as a mostly complete team, as was the case for Marvin, how would you suggest for other people to get involved in a topic like this, having come in and made new collaborations, met new people, got new potential colleagues and collaborators? What advice would you give to people who want to enter this area, who maybe don't know people to work with?
Yeah, I would definitely advise just to look up possible opportunities, things that are available, and just to sign up and see what happens. And also to not be afraid of signing up for something individually, especially because I did that as well, and everyone else on my team did that, and we all had no idea sort of what exactly we were signing up for, how it was going to turn out, and we were sort of thrown in together as a team, and we didn't know how sort of what our expertise was in, how we worked, and we had to sort of figure that all out, but it worked perfectly. And I think especially because we were all coming from different areas, it was really nice just to have a mix of that, and everyone had sort of something different to say. We didn't all come as a group of translators, for example. So I think signing up individually, I mean, team-wise, obviously, is also really nice. You can choose your team members and you can go there as a team, the way that Marvin did it. But I really liked it individually because you meet even more people. Now I have all these contacts, all these people that work in different fields and different institutions, and we managed to work on this really well together. And I think that is a super, super valuable, because that way you can even further the field and extend sort of, you know, meeting more people. And I think what is really valuable is just to sign up, just to see what happens, and just to look at opportunities, and especially not be afraid of signing up, even if you're signing up as an individual.
And even related to this question, there's been a slight follow-up question as well, which would be, and I suppose this is a question for all three of you really, would be, are there sort of good communities that people could join, or mailing lists? I mean, Danielle, it would be easy to mention a couple of conferences people could think of attending. Maybe we'll start with you, Danielle, on this one. What would you suggest for somebody who wants to get engaged in this community?
Yeah, I think the issue is that a lot of this stuff is very scattered. So a lot of universities have, it may not be in the computer science department or the engineering department, but a lot of universities will have research groups or seminar groups that work on these areas, and they might have mailing lists of their own. As far as professional international mailing lists go, I can't think of any, but I can certainly think of some workshops. The Association for Computational Linguistics, or ACL. It's an international conference, but it also hosts a lot of workshops. One is the workshop on gender bias in NLP. One is a workshop on widening NLP, which is particularly aimed at people from groups who are underrepresented in NLP. So, for example, women, non-binary people, people who aren't white, living in white majority countries. And it's a workshop that attracts also a lot of research on these areas, possibly because these are the people affected by these problems. So those are two that occur to me, but if anyone wants to email me later, I can send off a whole list of workshops and that kind of thing. But the place to start, I think, is universities in your country, finding research groups that work on these problems.
And Marvin, maybe steering the same question back to you, as somebody who originally did not come from the text analytics or the linguistics side, but more the computer vision side. How did you enter into this space? I mean, how did you even realize that this hackathon was taking place?
Well, I have been before that starting to play around and just look at, because let's say going back to university, before working the field that I'm working now, I was already learning about natural language processing and was really interested in it. And then some time ago, started to do also some small project with bird models and look more into things that you can do with that. Therefore, was always very interested, and also other people in our group interested in that field. And once I got, I think there was a WhatsApp chat that I was in that shared this hackathon and said that that it's still open for people who want to join. And I had a look at the topic to find bias in machine learning, and I thought, wow, that's a very useful course for humanities society. And whenever that's such a useful topic for society, I think it's definitely worth participating. I saw that it's in a field that I have also interest in participating in, and therefore, for me, it was a very nice hackathon to participate in and just to learn more about the entire topic and to learn more about how things are going and hopefully find a solution that could be helpful. Yeah.
Just to add to that as well, because I said to look at to research what types there are, what hackathons, what workshops. But if that's also really difficult, it's also, yeah, like Danielle said, really good to contact your universities, because for me, it was also my professor, for my supervisor for my thesis, who told me that this would be a really interesting hackathon for me to participate in. So I think, yeah, it is also, and even though I've already been that I'm also studying a master's in translation, it is still sometimes difficult to be aware of everything that's going on. So I think it's also, yeah, a really good idea maybe to reach out, yeah, to specific professors, to universities, to find out what options there are available that you could participate in, listen in on, to get more exposure to this.
That's good. So we are very slowly coming to the end. We have 2 minutes left, as I've been told. Are there any burning final comments anybody would like to make? I can also give you a prompt question as well if you would like. Okay, I'll give you a prompt question. Given infinite resources, infinite time, a team of infinite size, one sentence, which problem would you solve first? Danielle, we'll start with you.
Given infinite resources, okay, I think Janiça mentioned it earlier. I think the reason people focus particularly on gender and particularly on binary problems is because they're easy, because you can spot them very quickly. I think there's not really enough work on biases that revolve around word choice, which are much harder to spot. You need some subjective knowledge, and that includes racial bias around sexuality, where the problem is the words we pick rather than grammatical problems. So I would try and address that, although I don't know how.
Wow, no, I don't either, but it sounds great. Janiça, what would be yours?
I think I would create a summit with experts in this field in general to provide guidelines or a framework, what to research, where to focus on in research areas, because even if we all separately focus on this research or combined as a team, everyone still does it on their own. In German language, we don't even know how we want to define plural, feminine, and masculine together. Do we use a colon? Do we use a star? We're not even certain about how to do that in our own language. How are we supposed to define how the machine is supposed to translate it? So I think having a summit of experts, creating a framework, how to and where to research would be ideal.
Okay, thank you. Marvin?
For me, it is, it's visible that these machine learning models are biased because the data set are biased, but the data sets are biased because the society in general, I think, is biased. Because what we used a data set was Google News, and there was not one person that wrote these words. There were 100 billion words in there, like from all articles that were published on Google News, and people writing these data sets. They write it in the way because that's how the world sees things, and I think there's the problem. And with infinite resources and infinite time, I think this is the problem to solve, and I think it would be nice to change the world in a way that there's less bias in society and become more towards a fair and open society. Yeah.
Okay, So I would like to thank Marvin, Danielle, and Janiça for their comments and their participation in the How to Fix Bias in Machine Translation panel. Very much like to thank our audience members who asked questions and who engaged as well. So and thank you all for the engaging discussion, and also for the Goethe-Institut for hosting us as well.
Thank you.
I think we are out of time.
I would like to thank you as well. You guys are great. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rodrigo.
Okay. Thank you, Simon. So you can now officially close the session if you like. You are the host officially.
Oh, I am. Yes.
Or have you done that already?
I think I have. I think we are finished. Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, we are finished. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you again.
Rodrigo, do we need to do anything, or are we?
You can just leave if you want, or I'm not insisting, but if you.
Bye bye.
But yeah, we're going to close these breakout rooms anyway. So if you want to, I don't know, you want to continue like following the festival, you just go back to the main room. Otherwise, feel free to do whatever you want to do.
Okay, perfect. Well, thanks everybody, and it was nice to sort of participate and discuss with everybody. So, and also to the audience for asking some really nice questions as well. Okay, well, have a good weekend, everybody, and I'll hopefully see you in one of the other sessions as the day progresses.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Bye bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.